De Stijl. De Stijl, Dutch for the style, was an influential art movement that emerged in the Netherlands during the early 20th century. It was founded in 1917 by a group of artists and architects, most notably Theo van Doesburg and Piet Mondrian. The movement sought to create a new visual language that reflected the ideals of order, simplicity, and abstraction. The movement was officially launched with the publication of the De Stijl Journal in 1917, edited by the architect and writer, Theo van Doesburg. The journal became a platform for members to discuss and promote their ideas on art, architecture, and culture. It featured contributions from various artists associated with the movement. Neoplasticism was the theoretical foundation of De Stijl, and it emphasized the idea of creating art that was universally applicable and devoid of individual expression. Piet Mondrian played a crucial role in developing the principles of neoplasticism. Central to neoplasticism was the use of a grid structure. Mondrian's paintings often featured a grid of vertical lines, creating squares and rectangles. Each space was filled with primary colors, red, blue and yellow, or non-colors, black, white, and gray. This abstraction aimed to convey universal principles and spiritual harmony. Theo van Doesburg introduced the concept of elementarism as a reaction against the strict rules of neoplasticism. Elementarism allowed for more dynamic compositions and the use of diagonal lines, breaking away from the rigid structures of earlier De Stijl works. De Stijl principles also influenced architecture. Architects associated with the movement, such as Gerrit Rietveld, designed buildings with a focus on clean lines, open spaces, and a harmony between form and function. The impact of De Stijl extended beyond the visual arts to influence design, typography, and even everyday objects. The movement had a profound effect on the development of modern art and design, and its influence can be seen in subsequent movements such as Bauhaus and Minimalism. The emphasis on simplicity, abstraction, and a universal visual language laid the groundwork for the contemporary design principles that continue to shape the artistic landscape today. Piet Mondrian. Piet Mondrian, 1872–1944, was born as Pieter Cornelis Mondrian, in Amersfoort, the Netherlands, to a family of artists. His father was a drawing teacher, and his uncle, Frits Mondrian, was a landscape painter. Growing up in an artistic environment, Mondrian showed an early interest in painting. Mondrian was one of the founders of the De Stijl movement. He is best known for his abstract geometric paintings, characterized by the use of straight lines, right angles, and primary colors. In 1892, he began his formal art education at the Academy of Fine Arts in Amsterdam. Initially trained in a naturalistic style, he later embraced symbolism and experimented with various modern art movements. Mondrian's early landscapes, influenced by his native Dutch countryside, featured natural elements and a subdued color palette. Over time, his style evolved towards abstraction. In 1908, Mondrian moved to Paris, where he encountered the works of Fauvist and Cubist artists, including Picasso and Braque, and other avant-garde movements. This experience significantly influenced his artistic development. He admired the Cubists' deconstruction of form and space and began incorporating similar geometric elements into his work. Mondrian was also influenced by Theosophy, a spiritual movement that sought to explore the nature of reality and the divine. This influence is evident in the spiritual and symbolic aspects of Mondrian's later works, more abstract works. In the 1920s, Mondrian, along with Theo van Doesburg, founded the Stijl movement. He developed the concept of neoplasticism, characterized by the use of geometric shapes, primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, and a grid structure. Famous works from this period include composition with red, blue, and yellow. In his later years in New York, Mondrian created the Boogie Woogie series. These works, like Broadway Boogie Woogie, were inspired by the rhythm and energy of jazz music. The paintings feature a grid of colored rectangles, capturing the vibrancy of urban life. Piet Mondrian's contributions to abstract art and his development of neoplasticism have had a lasting impact on the art world. His works are celebrated for their simplicity, clarity, and the profound influence they had on modern art movements. Piet Mondrian. Evening, Red Tree. The painting, created in 1908, is currently housed in the Kunstmuseum, The Hague in Netherlands. It is one of the most iconic works from Mondrian's early phase and lies between post-impressionism, symbolism, and the abstraction that would define his later style. The painting shows a single, prominent tree, its twisting branches stretching dynamically across the canvas. The background is relatively minimal, allowing the structure and rhythm of the tree to dominate the visual field. Rather than presenting the tree in a naturalistic way, Mondrian stylizes it, emphasizing the curves and energy in the trunk and limbs. The image appears to vibrate with internal motion. Mondrian uses a bold, expressive palette dominated by deep reds, purples, and blues. The red of the tree against the dark, cool-toned background creates a striking contrast, evoking the intensity of evening light or perhaps an emotional, symbolic inner fire. This use of color is not representational, but emotional and spiritual, a clear influence from Fauvism and Van Gogh, whose expressive approach to color deeply inspired Mondrian. Mondrian was influenced by Theosophy, a spiritual movement that sought universal truths through mysticism and metaphysical connections between form, color, and energy. In this painting, the tree becomes a symbol of life, energy, and transformation. The twisting, branching form may represent spiritual growth, inner struggle, or the expansion of consciousness. The red can symbolize vitality, passion, or even the divine spark within nature. The evening setting suggests transition between day and night, light and darkness, material and spiritual. This aligns with Mondrian's emerging belief that art should reveal the underlying order of the universe, not simply depict its surface. The painting marks one of Mondrian's final works with representation before his focus onto full abstraction. Shortly after, his tree studies would become increasingly geometric, culminating in the linear, grid-based compositions of his mature style. It is an artwork of transformation, of nature, of perception, and of the artist himself. Piet Mondrian. Evolution. The painting, created in 1911, is currently housed in the Kunstmuseum, The Hague in Netherlands. It represents a significant moment in Piet Mondrian's early career, capturing his journey from symbolism and post-impressionism toward a more abstract form. It is a rare example of figurative work by Mondrian, and is often regarded as a key to understanding the artist's philosophical and spiritual transformation before he fully embraced abstraction. The painting is a triptych, a format traditionally associated with religious art, featuring 3 female forms, each occupying a vertical panel. The central figure faces directly forward, while the flanking figures are shown in 3/4 views, facing slightly inward. They appear nearly identical in pose and gesture, suggesting a gradual or cyclical transformation. The figures are set against a highly stylized, symbolic background filled with mystical shapes, red and yellow like flowers, and radiant, circular motifs. These suggest not a specific environment, but a spiritual or cosmic realm. The symmetry and simplicity of the composition point toward a meditative, ritualistic tone. The color palette is relatively subdued, dominated by soft creams, muted reds, and cool blues, but the use of vibrant outlines and symbolic color accents draws attention to certain features, halos, facial expressions, and hand gestures. The brushwork is smooth and controlled, emphasizing form and contour over texture or painterly effects. The painting can be interpreted as an allegory of spiritual or human development, perhaps tracing the soul's progress through stages of awareness or purification. The repetition of the female figure suggests stages of inner transformation, akin to Eastern or theosophical ideas of enlightenment and unity. The halo-like forms around the heads, and the upward-thrusting symbols in the background, evoke notions of illumination, ascension, and cosmic harmony. Mondrian was deeply influenced at this time by theosophy, particularly the writings of Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, who believed that art could act as a conduit between the material and spiritual worlds. Evolution is perhaps his most direct visual expression of this belief. The painting marks the end of Mondrian's figurative period. Within a year or two, he would abandon the human figure entirely, turning instead to the abstraction of natural forms, like trees, and eventually to the geometric purity of neoplasticism. At the time this work was created, Mondrian was also influenced by Art Nouveau, symbolism, and Dutch modern spiritualist movements, as well as early experiments with Cubism, which he would encounter more directly in Paris shortly afterward. Piet Mondrian's Evolution is a mystical painting that bridges the gap between his early representational work and the groundbreaking abstraction of his mature period. Rich in symbolism, spiritual reference, and compositional balance, it offers a deeply reflective moment in his art. By using the figure not as an end but as a symbol of transcendence, Mondrian plants the seeds of the radical abstraction that would define the rest of his career. Piet Mondrian. Tableau number 2, composition number 7. The painting, created in 1913, is currently housed in the Guggenheim Museum, New York. It marks a transformative period in Piet Mondrian's artistic evolution, as he began to move away from representational painting toward full abstraction. The artwork sits at a crossroads, combining the influences of analytic cubism, with Mondrian's own emerging vision of a universal visual language based on geometric harmony and spiritual order. The composition is structured around a dense network of black lines, intersecting at various angles to create a lattice-like framework. Within this scaffold are planes of muted color, predominantly grays, ochres, and subtle tonal shifts, which further abstract the composition. Though non-representational at first glance, the painting is widely believed to be derived from natural subject matter, likely a tree, a motif Mondrian had been exploring and gradually abstracting in the years leading up to this work. The color palette is intentionally subdued, echoing the limited tones of Cubist painters like Picasso and Braque, whom Mondrian studied while in Paris. However, unlike the Cubist's analytical depiction of three-dimensional space, Mondrian's composition avoids volume, instead emphasizing the flatness of the canvas. There is no central figure or grounding structure, elements fragment and fade at the edges, creating a rhythmic, almost musical sensation of visual tension. Mondrian's abstraction was not merely formal but deeply spiritual. Influenced by theosophy, a philosophical movement that sought universal truths through mysticism and geometry, Mondrian believed that art should reflect the cosmic balance of nature. This painting demonstrates his early attempts to find this balance through deconstruction and simplification. In this composition, Mondrian offers us a glimpse into the in-between, a world where the material is dissolving and the spiritual is beginning to take form through art. It is both a farewell to representational painting and a bold step toward one of the most influential abstract styles of the 20th century. It remains a compelling and contemplative work that reveals the profound discipline and vision behind Mondrian's art. Piet Mondrian. Lozenge with 4 lines and grey. Painted in 1926, this artwork is currently housed in the Museum of Modern Art, New York. In this painting, Mondrian continues to explore his neoplastic style, also known as the Stijl. It is an abstract painting that exemplifies Mondrian's mature style, characterized by the use of geometric shapes, a limited color palette, and a grid structure. The artwork belongs to the category of lozenge painting, a term derived from its distinctive diamond-shaped format, achieved by rotating the canvas at a 45-degree incline. The artist explains that this rotation preserves the intended balance of the grid, while the 45-degree tilt facilitates the creation of longer lines. In this specific piece, the lines seemingly extend beyond the canvas boundaries, as they intersect with the diagonals at various points. The format pushes the viewer's eye outward, toward the corners, making the composition feel expansive and open despite its minimalism. The painting is dominated by a large white lozenge that is positioned diagonally on the canvas and is set against a white background. Within the lozenge, there are 4 black vertical lines, evenly spaced, and 4 horizontal lines, creating a grid-like structure. Crucially, these lines do not connect, a deliberate break from the typical Stijl grid. This non-closure gives the piece a sense of incompleteness or openness, inviting the viewer to imagine the lines continuing beyond the frame. The use of colors is reduced to black, white and gray, and instead, the emphasis is on the relationship between the lines, shapes, and the overall composition. A single gray rectangle appears in one quadrant. It does not dominate the composition but acts as a subtle counterweight, anchoring the otherwise monochrome image. It's a rare example of Mondrian introducing gray, a middle tone that mediates between black and white, perhaps suggesting balance or transition. The gray introduces ambiguity between black and white, suggesting a unity beyond opposites. The painting appears empty but is full of intention. It asks us to look deeply into almost nothing. The spacing and isolation of the lines creates a musical effect, a visual rhythm that resonates without melody. The absence of color here becomes meaningful. Whereas other works might express dynamic interplay through red, blue, and yellow, this painting suggests a spiritual calm, a visual meditation. Although the composition relies on only 4 lines of different thicknesses, is carefully balanced, with a sense of harmony achieved through the precise placement of lines and shapes. Mondrian's use of the grid is intended to convey a sense of order and structure. This painting is part of Mondrian's ongoing exploration of abstraction and his progression toward an increasingly simplified and geometric style. His work during this period laid the foundation for what would later be known as abstract art. Piet Mondrian. Composition with red, blue, and yellow. The painting, created in 1930, currently resides in Kunsthaus Zurich, Switzerland. This artwork is a prime example of Piet Mondrian's mature style, which he called neoplasticism or de style. In composition with red, blue, and yellow, Mondrian continues to explore his signature style characterized by a grid of horizontal and vertical black lines that intersect at right angles, creating squares and rectangles. The composition is square, enhancing its sense of balance and equality. No side dominates. Within this structure, Mondrian places three primary colored shapes. A large red rectangle occupies the upper right. A blue square is placed in the lower left. A small yellow rectangle resides near the bottom right corner. The rest of the canvas is filled with white or off-white spaces, which are not just negative space, they actively participate in the composition. These areas vary in size and proportion, creating asymmetry that feels oddly stable. Mondrian restricts his palette to the three primary colors: red, blue, yellow, and non-colors, white, black. His use of color is not decorative but structural and symbolic. Each color has a kind of spatial and emotional weight. Red feels warm and advancing, it draws attention. Blue feels cooler and more recessive. Yellow feels light and energetic, often acting as a visual bridge. The white areas are not passive, they act like zones of potential, emphasizing the purity and clarity of the surrounding forms. Mondrian's work was heavily influenced by theosophy. He believed the universe operated according to universal principles, dynamic yet balanced forces, such as vertical versus horizontal, male versus female, matter versus spirit. In the composition, the grid becomes a metaphysical map, a way to visualize cosmic harmony. The painting is a spiritual model for how elements can coexist in dynamic balance. This particular painting has a deeply personal connection to modernist architecture, as it was owned and later donated by Alfred Roth. Roth and Mondrian shared a belief that art and architecture should strive for a rational, harmonious, universal aesthetic, one that promotes clarity, order, and spiritual calm in daily life. Mondrian's influence on architecture, design, and visual culture would later spread widely, from Bauhaus to graphic design, and even fashion, like Yves Saint Laurent's Mondrian dress. On the reverse side of the canvas is a handwritten inscription by Mondrian. Dedicated to my dear friend and colleague Alfred Roth. To count only with rapport, while creating them and while seeking their balance in art and in life. It is the beautiful work of today. It is preparing for the future. This inscription is more than a note of thanks, it encapsulates Mondrian's worldview. He saw his abstract compositions as blueprints for a better world, one where equilibrium and relationship are the guiding principles. The composition with red, blue, and yellow is one of Mondrian's clearest statements of artistic and spiritual purpose. Through a limited palette and deceptively simple geometry, he creates a profound vision of universal order, a world of balance and dynamic harmony. Piet Mondrian. Broadway Boogie Woogie. Painted in 1942, this artwork is currently housed in the Museum of Modern Art, New York. Created shortly after Mondrian's relocation to New York City, this work reflects a profound transformation in his art, infused with the rhythm, energy, and luminosity of his new urban environment. It is Mondrian's first major painting in America and his last completed canvas before his death in 1944. Where Mondrian's earlier neoplastic works were characterized by thick black lines and austere rectangular blocks of primary color set against white grounds, Broadway boogie-woogie breaks away with remarkable vitality. The black lines are replaced by a constellation of small colored squares, yellow, red, blue, and white, composed into a grid that pulses with rhythm and motion. These vibrant blocks no longer contain forms but rather animate the entire surface, transforming the once static grid into a dynamic field of interaction. The painting's structure evokes both a musical and a spatial logic. Inspired by the boogie-woogie jazz Mondrian loved, the composition translates music into visual form. The eye is drawn across the canvas in a rhythmic pattern, much like the foot-tapping tempo of boogie-woogie piano. Each small square and interruption in the grid functions like a note in a score or a beat in a dance, conveying improvisation, repetition, and variation. The canvas is divided into a grid of small squares and rectangles, reminiscent of the city grid of Manhattan. The grid is not strictly uniform, as Mondrian adjusted the size of the squares to accommodate the rhythm he desired. The intersections of the grid lines create a sense of pulsating movement. The overall impression suggests a depiction of people navigating the urban landscape, waiting for taxis, and engaging in the constant activity that defines the city's fast-paced lifestyle, both day and night. The composition is dynamic, with the colored squares resembling the lights of the city, and the intersections of the grid creating a sense of movement and rhythm. Mondrian's use of color in this painting is distinctive. The canvas is filled with small, vibrant squares of primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, interspersed with white and gray squares. The colors are carefully arranged, and the repetition of these elements creates a lively and rhythmic visual experience. The small, square units in the painting can be seen as a precursor to the pixelation seen in digital art. Each square is like a pixel, and when combined, they form a complex and visually engaging pattern. This pixelated aesthetic is ahead of its time, considering the painting was created in the 1940s. This painting is a visual exploration of the intersection between art and the vibrant energy of urban life, showcasing Mondrian's ability to adapt his style, while maintaining a commitment to abstraction and the search for harmony through geometric forms. Theo van Doesburg. Theo van Doesburg, 1883–1931, was a Dutch artist, designer, writer, and founder of the Stijl movement. Born as Christian Emile Marie Kupper in 1883, in Utrecht, Netherlands, he later adopted the name Theo van Doesburg. Van Doesburg studied at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, Belgium, from 1899 to 1903. He began his career as an impressionist and symbolist painter, influenced by artists such as Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin. Around 1915, Theo van Doesburg began to move away from traditional painting styles and embraced abstraction, inspired by the works of artists like Piet Mondrian. He started experimenting with geometric shapes, lines, and primary colors. In 1917, Van Doesburg, along with Piet Mondrian, founded the Stijl movement, which aimed to create a universal visual language based on abstraction and simplicity. Stijl advocated for the use of geometric forms, primary colors, and a strict grid structure in art and design. Theo van Doesburg expanded his interest to architecture and design, contributing articles to Stijl magazine and developing architectural concepts that reflected the movement's principles. He collaborated with architects like Gerrit Rietveld, and together they worked on the concept of elementarism, emphasizing the use of elemental geometric forms. In addition to his visual art, Van Doesburg was also a writer and poet. He wrote essays and manifestos that articulated the principles of Stijl. He played a crucial role in shaping the theoretical framework of the movement, promoting ideas of universality, harmony, and abstraction. However, conflicts within the Stijl movement emerged in the late 1920s, leading to a deviation of ideas between Van Doesburg and Mondrian. In response, Van Doesburg explored new artistic directions, including Dadaism and elements of surrealism. This opposition caused a rift within the movement, reflecting the challenges faced by avant-garde movements in maintaining a cohesive vision. Theo van Doesburg's legacy lies not only in his innovative artworks but also in his role as a theorist and co-founder of Stijl. His exploration of abstract forms and principles of universality continued to influence modern art and design, illustrating the dynamic evolution of avant-garde movements in the early 20th century. Theo van Doesburg. Composition 1, Still Life. Painted in 1916, this composition currently resides in Kröller-Müller Museum, Otterlo, Netherlands. The artwork is a prime example of Theo van Doesburg's early work, where he was still exploring various artistic styles before becoming a prominent figure in the Stijl movement. The painting is based on a traditional still life, possibly featuring objects like bottles, glasses, and fruit. However, these items are not rendered in a naturalistic way. Instead, they are flattened and fragmented into overlapping geometric planes. The composition is highly structured and compact. The artwork is characterized by closely arranged horizontal and vertical lines, along with intersecting circles. There is a strong architectonic quality to the arrangement. Each form seems constructed from rectangles, semicircles, and straight lines, laid out in a careful spatial balance. The color palette is relatively restrained, consisting mainly of muted tones and shades of browns, grays, greens, ochres, and occasional flashes of red or blue. The forms are outlined with sharp, dark contours, enhancing their flatness and making each component visually distinct. This emphasis on line and edge hints at the structural logic that would dominate his later Stijl work. The painting reflects the influence of Cubism, especially from the analytic Cubism of Picasso and Braque. Like them, the artist breaks down objects into multiple viewpoints, reassembling them on a flat surface. Unlike the earthy, fragmented surfaces of Cubism, Van Doesburg's forms are cleaner, more idealized, and ordered, suggesting his early steps towards abstraction. This artwork isn't really about objects, it's about relationships, form to form, color to color, and part to whole. He believed that true reality was spiritual, and could be accessed through harmonious abstraction. This painting captures his effort to reconcile the material world with metaphysical order. The composition showcases Theo van Doesburg's artistic development, revealing his exploration of Cubist ideas and moving towards the abstract, geometric style that would later define the De Stijl movement. Theo van Doesburg. Composition 9. The painting, created in 1918, is currently housed in the Kunstmuseum, The Hague in Netherlands. This painting is considered a further abstraction of his earlier work Card Players, 1916 to 1917, an example of De Stijl abstraction in painting, where the subject, figures playing cards, serves as a subtle foundation for the artist's radical simplification of form and color. The artwork presents a composition dominated by geometric forms, rectangles and squares, in a restrained palette of black, white, blue, and gray. The absence of primary colors like red and yellow, often associated with De Stijl, emphasizes a more subdued and contemplative aesthetic. The arrangement of shapes creates a dynamic interplay between positive and negative space. The black and blue forms appear to float against the white and gray background, generating a sense of depth and movement within the flat picture plane. This spatial tension reflects van Doesburg's interest in the balance between form and void, a concept central to De Stijl's philosophy. By reducing shapes down to their most basic geometric forms, the artist wanted to express a universally aesthetic and visual language. Theo van Doesburg was driven by the desire to move beyond the visible world and to uncover the spiritual essence of his art. The painting showcases Theo van Doesburg's commitment to the De Stijl movement's pursuit of universal harmony through abstraction. Through its geometric forms and limited color palette, the painting reflects a shift towards a new visual language that seeks to transcend individual expression and connect with broader, universal truths. As such, it remains a significant work in the history of modern art, illustrating the transformative power of abstraction. Theo van Doesburg. Counter-Composition 5. Created in 1924, this painting is currently housed in Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, Netherlands. As a leading figure of De Stijl and a close collaborator, and eventual ideological rival, of Piet Mondrian, van Doesburg used this series to challenge the strict vertical-horizontal framework that had defined neoplasticism. The painting is composed of a number of rectangular color fields, predominantly red, blue, yellow, black, and white. Unlike Mondrian's compositions, where vertical and horizontal black lines structure the space, van Doesburg rotates the entire composition on a diagonal axis. The lines and color blocks are no longer restricted to right angles relative to the canvas edges, instead, they are arranged with a 45-degree rotation, creating a sense of movement and tension. The rotation of the rectangular forms within the diamond-shaped frame, lozenge format, breaks away from the static balance of Mondrian's symmetrical layouts. The result is an image that feels like it is in flux, constantly shifting, yet paradoxically balanced. Van Doesburg believed that the diagonal was essential to introduce dynamism and vitality into abstract art. He coined the term elementarism to describe this new visual language, one that embraces asymmetry, vitality, and the dynamic rhythms of modern life. Despite the deliberate disturbance of order, the painting maintains a careful internal balance. The size, spacing, and positioning of each rectangle are meticulously calculated to create a sense of harmony through contrast. Large red and black fields dominate the composition, while smaller blue and yellow shapes offer counterbalance. The artwork is an exploration of the potential for abstraction to communicate universal concepts and emotions. Theo van Doesburg's painting is a synthesis of theory and aesthetics. The composition marks a turning point in the evolution of geometric abstraction. It represents van Doesburg's redefinition of the style principles that influenced subsequent movements and artists seeking to break away from traditional representational art. It is the belief in the creation of a worldwide visual language that could transcend cultural and national boundaries. Theo van Doesburg. Dancers. Painted in 1926, this artwork is currently housed in the Kröller-Müller Museum, Otterlo, Netherlands. The painting depicts two panels, the left shows a front-facing figure, the right its rear, but neither resembles a conventional human form. Instead, each dancer is presented with geometric shapes, semicircles for hips, rectangles for torsos, and triangles for limbs, hovering above a circular base that hints at rotation and poise. By limiting his palette to black against white, with touches of gray, ochre, blue and green, the artwork is focused on how each shape relates to its neighbor. The result is a silent choreography of forms. The eye moves from one angular element to the next in a steady, rhythmic pulse. The painting was inspired by Hindu imagery of Krishna in motion. Through what he called a step-by-step toward abstraction, van Doesburg gradually stripped away everything but the dancer's essential lines and volumes. In dancers, movement itself becomes the subject, in the precise balance of geometric planes. Influenced by Cubist fragmentation, it demonstrates how van Doesburg translated the dynamism of the body into lines and shapes, laying the foundation for the broader applications of the style across painting, design, and architecture.